During a family dinner, I accidentally mentioned I got a promotion. My sister rolled her eyes and said loudly, "Sure, keep dreaming, you minimum wage jester." After an hour, a knock on the door turned my so-called failure into their nightmare. It started like most Sundays do in my family, the type of Sunday you grow up half dreading, half accepting as an unchanging part of life. My parents still live in the same colonial-style house in West Hartford where we all grew up. Dinner is always at 5 p.m. sharp. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, steamed green beans, and that sweet cornbread my mom has made since we were kids. The kitchen smells like routine. Familiar, if a little suffocating. My siblings still live nearby. Carmen, the oldest, is a real estate agent married to a dentist and acts like she's been personally chosen by the universe to model what adult success looks like. Lydia, the middle child, is a stay-at-home mom who treats parenting like a competitive sport. And Bernard, the only other boy, runs his own accounting firm and never misses a chance to remind us that he doesn't work for anyone. I'm the youngest, Alaric. 35. I work in tech, but not the kind people imagine when they hear that. For years I bounced between contracts, startups, and freelance gigs. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't Instagram-worthy. But I worked hard, quietly, steadily. I never shared much with my family about what I did. They never seemed interested. That Sunday, dinner started the same way it always did. The table was noisy with familiar patterns, Lydia complaining about her daughter's piano teacher, Carmen showing off her latest home renovation photos, Bernard going on about taxes. I was half listening, half forking chicken into my mouth when it just slipped out, "I got a promotion last week." I hadn't planned to say it. It just happened. For a moment, nobody reacted. Then Carmen's lips curved into that smirk she's worn since high school, the one that's always meant, "Oh, that's cute." "Sure," she said, with exaggerated sweetness, "keep dreaming, you minimum wage jester." The room chuckled, Bernard grunted his version of a laugh, Lydia looked uncomfortable but said nothing. My mom reached for the cornbread like maybe she hadn't heard anything at all. My dad stared at the ceiling fan. No one came to my defense. I didn't say anything either. There was no point. This wasn't new. I'd learned to stomach their comments, to chalk it up to their ignorance of the tech world. They'd never really tried to understand me. I was just the computer guy. But what they didn't know was that I'd spent the last year working on a confidential project within a private tech venture funded by Avalon Ventures, a well-known but discreet investment firm. I was part of a product team developing infrastructure software for AI systems, and last week I'd been offered a leadership role in a spin-off initiative. It wasn't just a promotion. It was a career shift. It was the kind of thing that changed lives. But I didn't say that. Not then. Carmen went on talking about her second home in Vermont. Lydia showed everyone a video of her son playing soccer. Bernard complained about clients who don't understand capital gains. I faded into the background again, the way I always had. Then, just as the coffee pot was starting to gurgle in the kitchen, a knock came at the front door. It wasn't a light knock. It was the kind of knock that demands attention. Firm. Intentional. My mom stood up, wiping her hands on her apron. I stood too, more out of curiosity than anything else. At the door stood a man in a black suit, holding a sleek briefcase. "Mr. Alaric Bennett?" he asked. "Yes," I said, eyebrows raised. He handed me an envelope. "I was instructed to deliver these documents to you personally. It's in regard to your equity agreement and leadership appointment with Avalon Ventures." I opened it slowly. The contents were just what I'd thought they would be. My official offer as a technical director and founding team member of the new company. A substantial signing bonus. Stock options that, if the company took off like we expected, would be worth millions. I turned around. My family was gathered in the hallway behind me, watching. Carmen's eyes were fixed on the paper like it might disappear if she blinked. Bernard's face had gone pale. Lydia was staring at me in wide-eyed disbelief. The man gave a small nod and walked back to his car, leaving behind silence so dense you could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. I guess I won't be a minimum wage jester after all, I said quietly, not to be petty, but because the moment demanded it. My mom blinked rapidly. Would you like some pie? It was surreal. The next hour was awkward. The power dynamic had shifted, but no one knew how to address it. Bernard asked a few hollow questions about the company, probably trying to gauge whether he could get in on it. Carmen said almost nothing, her face was tight with something like embarrassment, though I doubted she'd ever admit it. Lydia complimented the way I'd kept this quiet and asked about the office location. The truth was, I didn't need anything from them. Not approval. No apologies. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy the silence that followed the knock. The way their faces changed. The moment I stopped being someone they dismissed and became someone they didn't understand, maybe even envied. As I sat back down at the table, the envelope still in my hand, the mood shifted like someone had turned off the radio in the middle of a loud song. The clattering of cutlery had stopped. No one went for seconds. Even the kids, usually running around or bickering in the other room, seemed suddenly quiet. Carmen was the first to try to resume normalcy. So, this company, you're working with venture capitalists now, she asked, voice pitched in a tone that didn't sound entirely curious or congratulatory. I nodded, placing the envelope beside my water glass. It's been in the works for a while. I wasn't supposed to say anything until the documents were finalized. She gave a slow nod, as if that explained something she'd missed. Interesting, she said, though her eyes didn't match the word. Bernard shifted in his seat and crossed his arms. That's Avalon, right? They're based in Boston? Headquartered in Boston, I replied. Our team is building out of Hartford for now. But we'll have operations across a few cities by next year. My mom looked like she didn't know what to say. My dad kept sipping his coffee, gaze now pinned to a spot just past my shoulder. I wasn't trying to flaunt anything, but the weirdness of the moment hung over us like humidity before a storm. There was no script for this. For once, they didn't know where to place me, how to categorize what I'd just become. It disrupted a narrative they'd all silently agreed on a long time ago. For years, I'd been the one they pitted. The one they joked about. They thought I was floating between jobs because I couldn't hold one down, not because I was building a path they couldn't understand. To them, if there wasn't a suit or a title they recognized, it didn't count. I'm really happy for you, Lydia said finally, breaking the silence. I mean, it sounds huge. I smiled, not because I needed her praise, but because she'd always been the most conflict-averse of the three. Compliments were her peace treaties. Thanks. It's been a wild ride getting here. Carmen leaned back in her chair and crossed her legs. So, what exactly does your role involve? Like, what do you do, day to day? That was rich, coming from someone who once asked me if I just reboot computers all day. I'm overseeing infrastructure deployment and systems architecture, I said simply. Basically, making sure the software can scale properly. It's a little technical, but it's crucial to the platform we're building. Carmen gave a tight-lipped smile and nodded as if she understood. She didn't. And that was fine. I excused myself to wash up in the guest bathroom. As I stood at the sink, the familiar floral-scented soap foaming in my hands, I stared at my reflection and felt something I hadn't felt in years in that house, calm. I wasn't angry. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was just grounded. I remembered the younger version of myself, the one who used to sit at this table during his 20s, trying to explain what a startup was while Bernard smirked and Carmen scrolled through her phone. I remembered how many times I left this house with my confidence chipped away, second-guessing if maybe I was failing just because their lives looked more stable. And now, I was the one delivering documents by hand on a Sunday evening. When I returned to the dining room, things had shifted further. The kids were being gathered into coats and shoes, dessert had been cleared, and conversations had splintered off into smaller, awkward chunks. Lydia came up to me by the front door and gave me a hug. "I'm sorry if Carmen was a little harsh earlier," she whispered. "She doesn't mean it, you know." "She always means it," I replied quietly, not with bitterness, just fact. She didn't deny it. Just squeezed my arm and walked out with her husband and kids. Carmen said a stilted goodbye from the doorway. No eye contact. No hug. Bernard lingered just a little longer. "Hey," he said, tapping the side of his phone as if warming up to an idea, "if your company's ever looking for a fractional CFO. Or just someone to consult, you know where to find me." I gave him a polite smile. "I'll keep that in mind." He nodded and left. Just like that, it was me and my parents. My mom fussing in the kitchen, Dad seated with a blank expression like he was reviewing a mental list of regrets. "You didn't tell us you were doing so well," Mom finally said. "We had no idea." "I know," I said. I wasn't trying to hide it. I just stopped bringing things up when no one seemed interested. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Dad didn't say anything. Not then. I collected my coat and stepped out into the cold night, the air crisp and still. My phone buzzed, a congratulations text from one of my coworkers who must have heard I'd gotten the documents. I replied with a quick thumbs up and started walking to my car. That evening didn't feel like a win. It felt like the end of something. A shedding of the last bit of me that wanted validation from people who'd never really tried to understand who I was. I didn't want revenge. I wanted to be seen. And now that I had been, I wasn't sure it mattered anymore. But I did know one thing: nothing would be the same after that knock on the door. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I sat in my car in my parents' driveway for a few extra minutes. The street was quiet, most of the neighborhood had already gone inside, porch lights flickering on, casting soft yellow glows onto the sidewalks. I rolled the window down slightly and just breathed. That house behind me, the one I grew up in, had never felt particularly hostile. But it hadn't felt warm either. More like neutral ground where expectations whispered at you through framed photos, heirlooms, and tightly scheduled dinners. For so long, I had wanted to prove something in that house. That I was doing okay. That I wasn't the failure they silently agreed I was. That I wasn't just the one who couldn't figure it out. Now that I had nothing left to prove, I didn't know what to feel. Not satisfied. Not pride. Something else. Something quieter. Maybe grief for all the years I wasted trying. I drove back to my place, my new place, technically. I'd moved into a condo downtown, overlooking Bushnell Park. It was modern, sleek, more space than I needed, but a kind of physical confirmation that everything I had worked for was real. I'd furnished it slowly, carefully, with none of the chaos or clutter I remembered from my childhood home. Just space to think. Space to breathe. By the time I walked through the door, kicked off my shoes, and set the envelope on the kitchen counter, my phone had lit up with a handful of texts. "Carmen, congrats again. Sounds like a big deal." No punctuation, no warmth. But the fact that she texted at all was a shock. "Bernard, send over your email when you can. I have something I want to loop you in on. Big opportunity." I stared at that one for a long time. The irony almost made me laugh. Lydia had sent a picture of her daughter holding up a scribbled drawing of a robot labeled "Uncle Ulrich is smart." She misspelled my name, but it made me smile anyway. That was the weirdest part, suddenly being at the center of a shift you didn't ask for. The quiet ones, the ones no one thinks will succeed, we work in the background, carry the weight of being underestimated. When we finally break through, no one knows what to do with us. Not even us. The next few days were oddly normal. Work ramped up as we started planning internal briefings, organizing the new team structure, and quietly assembling the infrastructure for our product launch. I stayed late at the office. I'd built my reputation on being reliable, not flashy, and I didn't plan to change that now. Still, the messages from my family didn't stop. Lydia was the most consistent, checking in, inviting me to a weekend brunch with her kids, asking how things were going. I appreciated her effort, even if it felt like she was trying to patch holes in a boat that had long since drifted away. Carmen didn't say much more after her one-line text, but her husband reached out on LinkedIn of all places. He congratulated me on the big move, said he'd love to hear more about the company, and asked if I might be interested in presenting something to his dental investors group. I didn't even know dental investors were a thing. I didn't reply. Bernard's follow-up came in the form of a PDF presentation he emailed me out of the blue titled Future of Financial Growth in AI Startups. It was filled with charts, buzzwords, and a 5-slide breakdown of how his firm could optimize early capital efficiencies. I read it twice. Then deleted it. It wasn't anger that kept me from engaging. It was exhausting. They hadn't really changed. They were just responding to a shift in status. They hadn't suddenly become interested in me, they were interested in what I had become. Then, Friday evening came. I'd just gotten home when I saw a missed call from my mom. No voicemail, which was unusual. She always left one. I called her back. "Hi, sweetheart," she said, her voice soft. "Hey, everything okay?" There was a pause. "Your father wants to talk." That alone put me on edge. My dad wasn't the type to talk. He was a quiet man, reserved, occasionally stern, rarely emotional. When he passed the phone to him, I half expected some kind of awkward apology or, worse, a lecture on money. "Alaric," he said. "Hi, Dad." Another pause. I could almost hear him adjusting the phone in his hand. "I saw the news." That threw me for a loop. "News?" "The press release. Avalon put it out this morning. I saw your name." I hadn't even checked the wire feeds yet. Our PR team must have posted the partnership announcement early. "Oh," I said. "Yeah, they must have published it today." "You're a director now?" "Yes." Another long pause. "I didn't realize you'd gotten that far," he said, voice low. I waited. He wasn't finished. "I should have paid more attention to what you were doing." That stopped me. My dad had never said anything like that before. Not in 35 years. "I didn't know what it meant," he continued. "I thought it was. I don't know. Hobby work. Online stuff. You didn't talk much about it." "I didn't think anyone was interested," I replied quietly. "I was just trying to understand it in my own way," he said. I guess I never really asked the right questions. There was something honest in his voice. Something tired. "I appreciate that, Dad," I said. And I meant it. It didn't fix anything. But it was a start. He passed the phone back to Mom, who chatted a bit longer about groceries and weather and nothing in particular, which somehow made the earlier part of the call feel even heavier. After we hung up, I stood there in the kitchen, phone still in my hand, staring out the window at the street below. Recognition from my dad had been a ghost I'd long stopped chasing. Hearing it now, in his unpolished, awkward way, felt like finding something you didn't even realize you'd lost. Not full approval. Not even pride. Just acknowledgement. And somehow, that mattered more than all the texts, emails, or LinkedIn messages that had come pouring in that week. The weekend came fast, and with it, a brunch invitation from Lydia that I hadn't yet responded to. I wasn't avoiding her, I just wasn't sure I had the emotional bandwidth to sit through a casual family catch-up where everyone acted like the previous week's dinner hadn't happened. But I ended up going. Partly because Lydia had always, even in her passive, conflict-dodging way, been the only one who really tried to bridge gaps in the family. Partly because I was curious, how would they treat me now, with the dust settled and the press release out? Her house was only about 20 minutes away from mine, tucked in a quiet neighborhood near the university. I pulled into the driveway and saw her kids drawing with sidewalk chalk, their messy little masterpieces spilling across the cement. Her husband, Alan, waved from the porch. He was one of those laid-back guys who didn't say much but had a good-natured vibe about him, which made him a unicorn in our family. Uncle Alaric, one of the kids squealed, sprinting over and nearly crashing into my legs. I knelt down and ruffled his hair. That kind of reception was new. Inside, Lydia had laid out an impressive spread: frittata, fresh fruit, those little smoked salmon bagels she loved to show off on Instagram. We made small talk at first. Kid stuff. Weather. House projects. She was teasing me into something, I could feel it. So, she said as we sat down at the table, Mom's been calling me a lot this week. I think the dinner shook her a bit. Shook her? She didn't know, Alaric, Lydia said gently. None of us did. You've always kept to yourself. I kept quiet because every time I talked about work, someone rolled their eyes. She sighed. I know. I think we were wrong. About a lot. There it was. Not quite an apology, but more than silence. I'm not asking anyone to fall at my feet, I said. I just didn't expect to get mocked for something that was actually a big deal. She nodded. I know Carmen can be cruel. She's always been that way, especially when she's threatened. Threatened? I asked, raising an eyebrow. You flipped the dynamic. She's used to being the accomplished one. Bernard's the moneymaker. I'm a mom. You were the one who hadn't figured it out yet. That gave her something to lean on. I hadn't thought of it that way. But it made a cruel kind of sense. She texted me again this morning, Lydia added, buttering a slice of toast. Said she's still processing everything. Which for Carmen, I think, is as close as you'll get to admitting she was wrong. Processing what? I asked. That I'm not a joke? Lydia looked at me for a long moment, then said, maybe just that you weren't what she thought you were. None of us knew. It was strange hearing that. As if my success hadn't just surprised them, it had threatened to unspool the stories they'd told themselves about who we all were. Carmen, the golden child. Bernard, the business genius. Me, the side character with potential that never went anywhere. I stayed at Lydia's house for another hour, listening to her daughter play piano, watching Ellen grill something for lunch even though it was barely 11:30, and quietly observing the warmth in her home. It wasn't perfect, but it was softer than the world I grew up in. When I left, she hugged me at the door. It felt more real than most things I'd gotten from the family in years. You deserve all of this, Alaric, she said. On the drive home, I let that sink in. Not because I needed the affirmation, but because for once, it didn't feel patronizing. It felt true. The following Monday, I went into work early. Our team was expanding faster than expected, and I was tasked with onboarding 2 new engineers. I was still adapting to the new title. Meetings now started with me, decisions stopped with me. I'd spent years waiting for someone else to approve things. Now people were waiting for me. I kept my head down and did the work. That's who I was. Even with the change in title, income, and status, I hadn't turned into someone else. But the shift in my family didn't stop at that one dinner. That week, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered out of habit. Alaric, the voice said. It was Carmen. I paused. Hey. I wanted to talk, she said, sounding uncertain in a way I didn't recognize. Okay. I was a jerk, she blurted out. At dinner. I shouldn't have said what I did. I'd been thinking about it all week. I stayed silent, letting her fill the space. She always hated silence. You were right to be upset. It was rude. I didn't know. And I guess I assumed too much. That's kind of been the pattern, Carmen. She let out a breath. I know. I didn't expect you to end up doing something that big. That's not a dig, she rushed to say. It's just, you were always quiet about your work. We thought you were drifting. Because I didn't show off like Bernard? I asked. Maybe, she admitted. You didn't play the same game we were all playing. Well, I was never trying to play your game. I know that now. There was something in her voice that wasn't quite regret, but something adjacent. An awareness, maybe. A shifting of old scaffolding. I'm sorry, she said again. Not just for dinner, but for a lot of things. I didn't say I forgave her. I wasn't ready to. But I thanked her. That was something. After we hung up, I stared out my office window for a long time. Below, people rushed along the street, taxis honked, and someone was walking their dog in the middle of the day. Life moved, whether you paid attention or not. I thought about all the years I'd sat at that dinner table, my voice smaller than theirs, my success still a work in progress. Now the silence in those rooms wasn't mine. It belonged to them. I wasn't vindictive. But I also wasn't going to shrink back into that small version of myself to make them comfortable again. I didn't set out to get revenge. That's not how I operate. My motivation has never been to tear anyone down, just to build something I could be proud of. Something I could stand on. But sometimes, revenge doesn't come in the form of punishment. Sometimes, it's the slow and quiet recalibration of how people see you. And once they see the real you, the you they mocked or dismissed, they can't unsee it. That alone can be its own kind of justice. Weeks passed. Work kept me grounded. The company was gaining momentum, early investors were buzzing, a couple of industry blogs picked up our name, and I was now fielding calls from other tech companies trying to collaborate, which usually meant, please tell us what you're building. And then came the charity gala. It was an annual event hosted by the West Hartford Civic Foundation, an opportunity for the town's so-called elite to mingle, show off, and parade around in cocktail attire under the pretense of raising money for community programs. Carmen had gone every year since she married into money. Bernard donated a small fortune each year just to get his name printed in the program. This year, I received an official invitation. It was printed on heavy, expensive paper and arrived in a thick envelope with a gold crest. I almost laughed when I saw it. My first instinct was to toss it. But then I thought, no. Why not go? I didn't even have to make a statement. I could just show up, be myself, and let reality speak for itself. Not petty, not dramatic, just undeniable. I RSVP'd yes. I showed up in a charcoal suit tailored weeks before, simple but sharp. Nothing flashy, no designer logos. Just well-fitted confidence. I brought a guest, a friend of mine, Celeste, who worked in legal consulting and had the kind of presence that filled a room without a word. When we walked in, the energy changed. People noticed. Not in a red carpet kind of way, but in that subtle, unmistakable shift, the one where conversations pause, and glances linger a little too long. Bernard was by the bar. Carmen was standing near the silent auction table, wearing a green velvet dress and chatting with someone I vaguely recognized from high school. It didn't take long. Carmen spotted me first. Her eyes widened slightly. Then she composed herself and gave a polite wave. Alaric, she said, walking over. You came. Of course, I said. Thanks for the recommendation. I assume you had something to do with the invite? She hesitated. They mentioned your name during planning. I guess your company made quite the splash lately. I smiled. Yeah, we're getting there. Celeste excused herself politely, giving us space. Carmen eyed her briefly. Friend from work? Friend, yes. From one of our legal partners. She nodded slowly. So. How are things going? The new role? Busy. Exciting. A little overwhelming. There was a pause. You look different, she said. Do I? I don't know. More confident. Comfortable. I am. She opened her mouth like she might say something else, but nothing came. So I nodded and moved on, heading toward the main dining area. 10 minutes later, Bernard found me near the hors d'oeuvres. "Hey," he said, extending a hand. "Good to see you." "You too." "I heard you're one of the sponsors this year," he added, sipping from his glass. "Is that right?" "Yeah. Avalon made a donation under my name. Part of our community engagement program." He blinked. "That's generous." "It's good PR," I said with a shrug. But it felt nice. Supporting something local. Feels different when it's your own money, doesn't it? He laughed, though it sounded a little thin. "Sure does." I wasn't trying to rub it in. But I wasn't hiding either. We ended up seated at the same table during the dinner portion. I sat beside the director of the foundation, who kept asking about Avalon's expansion and hinted that the board was interested in younger leadership for next year's event. Carmen overheard and stiffened. At one point, Bernard leaned over and asked if I'd consider sitting down with one of his clients, a venture capitalist looking to diversify. I gave a non-committal answer and pivoted the conversation elsewhere. I had no intention of connecting with him. Not after years of being treated like I didn't belong at the grown-ups table. By the end of the night, something had shifted. No one mocked me. No one smirked. No one made me feel small. Instead, there was distance. A respectful kind of distance. Like people weren't sure how to approach me now. Like I'd outgrown whatever role they'd assigned me, and they didn't know how to write a new script. And it wasn't just Carmen or Bernard. Other family friends, old classmates, even my old high school teacher, all came up with that same expression, surprise, tinged with curiosity, layered under a new kind of respect. When the evening wrapped, Celeste and I stepped outside under the soft glow of the event lights. "How was that for you?" she asked, pulling her coat tight against the breeze. "Strange," I said. "But good. You didn't seem uncomfortable." "I wasn't." She smiled. "Then I'd say that's a win." On the drive home, I thought about what revenge really looks like. It wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't a confrontation or a speech. It was showing up fully as yourself, after years of being misjudged, and letting that truth settle into the air like a quiet storm. It was walking into a room full of people who once underestimated you, and watching them realize they'd been wrong all along. And then? Walking away without needing them to say it out loud. That was the ending I didn't know I needed. That was the real win.